Hiya, Mike. How you doing?
Doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Frustrated, but good. So do you want to introduce yourself to everybody? Because I want to find out a lot more about who you are and what you do, if that's okay.
Okay. I'm Mike Flinn. I'm a level 7 qualified psychotherapist. I've got a diploma at level 7. I was trained by Relationships Scotland and then Relate in England. I qualified in 2001 and then got my full diploma at level 7 in 2004. I work with adults, children, couples, families. I That's pretty much it for my professional stuff.
Yeah.
I have two kids of my own who are both in their 40s. Single
Wow.
parent. Um, so it which was we separated amicably. So it sort of began to get me interested in the whole counselling process at that point.
Yeah. What? So, what involvement do you have in the family courts?
Um, I've been working a little bit more frequently in the family courts for about 5 years, basically through people I got to know. Like I know Louise Tickle, the Guardian journalist who writes about the family court. I started to work with Ali Bushell. She and I used to argue quite happily on Twitter, and then one day she asked me to be a therapist working for her company too. So I've worked in a few cases for her, and occasionally I get asked outside that as well.
And what does that look like? So, what involvement? Just to people that don't really know how your role, what your role would play in a family court proceedings.
It's quite varied. Because I'm a family counsellor, I can look at how to get families. So parents who aren't talking to each other, I can look at maybe beginning to help them negotiate a way to talk to each other for the benefit of their children. As long as there's no sort of abuse going on or anything like that, then we can look at, okay, how do you start to work together for the interests of your kids? Um, there, it it can be. It's one of the most stressful jobs I do, to be honest, as a therapist, because you're getting very emotional responses from quite a number of different people, and so different people have different motives for wanting to engage. And at the
Mm,
bottom of it all is still kids.
yeah,
And for me,
yeah,
that's the most emotional part, is seeing kids probably not getting the best out of what they should be able to have. It's a bit wishy-washy, but yeah.
yeah. So, do you do psychological reports for court then?
No, I do very
So,
brief
what
reports
role?
on progress of clients.
Right.
So
So, in
I'm
what
not.
for? So, what? Go on. Sorry.
No, I'm not qualified to do psychological reports. So that they're specifically the remit of psychologists, not me.
Right. So, in a family court scenario, what role would you play in that?
It is talking. Generally, it's talking to the parents, and occasionally I'll talk to the children as well. Um, I try and do most of that face to face, so I travel around the country trying to meet up with people. Certainly initially, because I like people to know who they're talking to. And it is a lot of it's just mediation and negotiation, and also reflecting back why people might be reacting towards somebody in a way that they are, what that person might be, um, what their actions might encourage in other people as well, so that it gradually
Yeah.
raises awareness of why people are interacting with that person in the way that they are and what they can do about it.
So, do you not actually go into the courts, into the
No,
courtroom?
no.
So, what do you see before in the mediation process? What do you see before? What's your experiences leading up to it ending up in family court?
Um, do you mean what do I see in the dynamics, or what information do I have?
Both.
Okay. Generally I'll get to see the
I want to know everything.
Thanks. Generally I'll get to see the psychologist reports and
Right.
CAFCASS reports, social worker reports. So I'll get to see, and sometimes I'll get quite a lot of back cases as well. So like I've got a report at the moment that's got over 800 pages, and that's that's relatively common. I've got one that somebody's asked me to have a look at the moment that's 2,000 pages because there's a 4-year history, and you have to try and make sense of what's going on. You have to try and understand where the psychologist was coming from, how the psychologist got to their views. Occasionally I've come across psychologists who I disagree with. Some of them I don't disagree with, and you can see how they form their views. So it's quite a lot of beginning to understand that, and also how the guardians or CAFCASS officers or the social workers have come to their view as well, and what their advice and input is. And then it's back to, okay, let's have initial meetings with the families and see what they want.
And on a percentage, what would you say you would look at them reports and think how wrong that some of the professionals have got it? Be honest. No pressure.
No, thanks. There are certain people who, if anyone follows my Twitter feed, they'll know what I think about unregulated experts. And there are certain unregulated experts I profoundly disagree with. A lot of sometimes just on the way the report has been written and formulated and how they've drawn conclusions from information that, in my professional opinion, doesn't make any sense at all. And sometimes the recommendations of the reports I disagree with. So for example, I've heard of one case where in the end a court order expressly ruled out a young person being able to access therapy. And it's like, well, what is the purpose of that? Why can't that person get therapeutic support at a life stage if they need it? So I would disagree like that. So there are some specific areas about unregulated experts that I just think, what? And some of the stuff I've read from unregulated experts isn't, in my view, it doesn't stand up when you question it.
And are you allowed to challenge them or not?
No. I can make my points. I can.
Yeah.
It depends. To be honest, I've worked with some seriously good social workers in CAFCASS offices. I know you see quite a lot of stuff about how CAFCASS officers and social workers have their own agenda. The ones I've worked, I must be lucky. I mean, Ali Bushell is a very professional social worker. And so are the people that are employed by our company. And I've worked with a couple of others, both locally and further away, who you can really have a robust conversation with about, okay, where do we take this? How do we do it? So I haven't come across a social worker or CAFCASS officer in this 5-year period where I've done, I don't know, over 10, 12 cases maybe, where I disagree with what the approach of the social worker and the CAFCASS officer is. And if we're going to disagree, then we can have a discussion and sort out a way forward.
But how many of them cases involve domestic abuse?
I don't know. Maybe about 3/4 of them.
Yeah. As an overall, in 5 years, you would say 3/4 of them are domestic abuse related cases.
Yeah, but then that's why I'm getting involved in them anyway. So my sample is skewed quite a lot.
But are you so? For instance, if you sort of meet these parents, do you find it quite transparent? Because I usually do. Do you know what I mean that most professionals would miss? I can normally pick up on things. I think it's because I've experienced it personally that I can usually see straight through it.
It's it's essential to go in with an open mind, right? And because sometimes the things aren't as they seem.
Mm.
Um, the as a general rule of thumb, I'm going to be general because this isn't specific. Generally, I find that the person who's most annoyed and most angry and most upset is generally the one who's being coerced or has
Mm.
had is basically feels they're being treated extremely unfairly. Usually, stereotypically, right? And this is stereotypically, so you've got to be able to see beyond this. You get one
Mhm.
very annoyed and frustrated parent and one very calm, pleasant parent.
Yeah.
And I've talked to a few because basically the calm parent knows how to press the other parent's buttons.
Yeah.
And that's not in all cases, which is this why I keep emphasizing it's essential that you have an open mind, because sometimes it is exactly the opposite way around. And
Mm.
the shouty person is generally a shouty person.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time there's a reason why. So those dynamics, in my experience anyway, are quite common.
But how can you mediate with in that scenario if there's domestic abuse involved?
It's very difficult. It Because then I'm dependent. It's going to be more often than not. There's going to be a court order to engage with me, and a lot of the time that means there's not been a finding of fact about the abuse. Not all in all cases, but a lot of time there isn't a finding of fact.
Mm.
And then what the courts tend to go with is that each parent has a right, or a child has the right to access both parents.
Mhm. But
Um,
not, in my opinion, not at any cost.
no, absolutely,
You
no.
know, but it seems to be coming quite more and more that we're hearing that, it tends to be at any cost, doesn't it?
I've
And
seen a
that I
few like
can't
that.
get my head around. Yeah, I can't get my head around that at all. How anybody can even try and justify allowing rapists and, abusers contact with the children. I just can't get my head around that.
I think with rape, you're probably moving into a different area. But
Hmm.
with if two parents are in an abusive relationship, again, in my experience, it doesn't necessarily mean they'll be abusive parents. It just means the relationship between
Yeah.
the two adults is abusive. So again, it's figuring that one out. Is this parent a
Mm.
good enough parent? Are they going to bring up their child in a non-abusive atmosphere? So it's not per se if you've got two abusive parents, then that child shouldn't have access to both.
Yeah.
But again,
But
it's a really fine line to decide that.
it is, and it is very, very complex, isn't it? Because I think
Yes,
you have to stand outside at box, don't you, and kind of
yes,
look at each individual. But for
yeah.
me, when there are, there's clear evidence that one of the parents has been abusive, and they've been abusive in front of the children, which has emotionally damaged that child, then that's where it changes for me. Because I think, you know, they've got parental responsibility, and that responsibility also lies with them to make sure that the child's protected. Now, abusing a mother in front of a child is not, you know, it's not good behaviour. It's not how we behave, is it? So, what is that teaching that child, and that emotional traumatic impact that it's having on that child as well?
Mm,
Um, I mean, I said to you before when we spoke, didn't I? My youngest son were diagnosed with child complex development trauma,
yeah.
and it's quite hard for most professionals, I want to say, to understand how that works for him. Um, a lot just don't seem to get it at all, because I think his behaviour, it sort of mimics ADHD and autism. So
Right.
it's really, really complex for professionals to try and recognise to sort of define the line, because it's a fine line, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So his coping mechanisms as a child are a lot different to an adult. He will have outbursts and things like that. He sort of shows his emotions in a meltdown. Basically, he'll just have a
Yeah.
meltdown. We have occasions where he's had panic attacks. I've gone through periods of time where he's self-harmed, and around that time, it was, it were really hard, because I felt as though the system was enabling the abuse to continue. So it was actually the system that was traumatizing him just as much as what he'd already endured. Does that make sense? So, like,
Yeah.
social workers taking him at a class, we know teaching assistant with him, which is what he needs in class. He's got an EHCP, which is a legal binding document. But yet, social worker found it okay to take him out of a classroom in his safe environment, away from his peers, who were then thinking, well, hold on a minute, seen a social worker. And then we know how it rolls. They go home, they tell the mum, oh, I had a social worker today, And I think the amount of times that they put so much pressure on him, he were only 7 years old. 7 years old to the age of 10, he had it.
Right.
And continuously telling them the same thing. I were having meltdown on a daily basis. Please tell them to stop. I've told them. Why aren't they listening to me? And it were horrendous. It were absolutely horrendous. So I think at what point do they actually listen to the child?
Yeah. I think it's a key question, and when I'm working with kids, I tend to ask, why are you behaving like that? Not in that. We explore. Well, what happened? What made you do that? What made you act like that? And same with adults as well, but with kids especially. Or if social workers are involved, it's like, well, why do you think that child was responding to you in that way? What do you think they were trying to do?
I think the social workers involved were just kind of like thinking, oh, I'll just go in with a game of Jenga and he'll just open up to me and tell me everything, all his feelings. And it doesn't really work like that, I'm afraid, because he'd already lost all sort of... As time goes on, they lose all faith and trust anyway with professionals that are speaking to them, where he just totally disengaged. He just would not speak to them. But then, as you'll probably know, how it rolls then is, I'm the one that's not promoting contact.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I'm I have always tried to keep things away from my children to protect them best I can. But when you're living in an abusive environment, that's virtually impossible.
Yeah.
And even to the point where I can remember, we were in COVID and I couldn't go see solicitors and things, so everything had to be at home. We couldn't leave the house or anything. And then I were accused, my kids have heard too much. Well, of course they have. I can't, with best will in the world, you think that children aren't listening, don't you?
Yeah.
But they are. They listen to everything. But even that got sort of twisted round, and I'm thinking, well, hold on a minute. What were I meant to do when I couldn't actually go to a solicitor's office and speak about anything? So it's just as though when you go in front of a judge, everything seems to, you can't do right for doing wrong. You're too emotional, or you've not got enough emotion, or you're not, you're being overprotective, or you're not safeguarding enough. It's like a double-edged sword.
I think you've got a point. I think with notable exceptions, there's a general lack of understanding of the dynamics in relationships, especially when there's abusive relationships or they've really badly broken down. And there are times when I can read something or hear something, and you just think, why has that been interpreted that way? And it doesn't mean that I think I'm always right, because I've got 2 kids and a partner who point out when I'm not right, so I get that lesson quite often. But it's just they miss the key signs, or they misinterpret the key signs. And so, like, I had to work with a girl a while ago now who was totally disengaged from her dad, and was, just like you said, was so hacked off with not being listened to, not heard, not, she was, in her teens, not heard, nobody. And she, point blank, the first time I was supposed to engage with her, refused to talk to me. And I could understand why. And so we had to get to a point where she did come and talk to me, and she did. And she made her points again, and she was really hacked off that she had to come and talk to me to say something she'd said about 6 or 7 times already. And people just weren't listening. And her mum was being accused of alienation. And it's like, this kid just definitely doesn't want to go.
But why won't they? Why will they not listen? Why can they not just accept that in abusive relationships, quite often the children don't want to have contact because they've actually seen that other parent being so abusive? Why can't they just take that as what it is? Why do we have to have all these assessments that's dragged on for sometimes years on end? And it's like, oh, well, we didn't really conclude from that hearing, so we'll have another hearing. It's like, at minute I'm dealing with a case, and it's absolutely ridiculous, because this child is a teenager, 14, nearly 15 years old. Do you know what I mean? 6 foot, 6 foot lad. And it's like they're having a 3-day hearing, right, to see if mum's alienated her son. But at end of hearing, if that 14-year-old, nearly 6 foot tall lad don't want to see his dad, then who's going to force him? So what's point in trial? What's point in 3-day trial? What are they going to do? Physically remove him, drag him? So why? I don't get it. I just don't get it. What is the purpose of that other than making a load of money?
Yeah, I think if something's that irretrievably broken down, rather, then there's, unless you want to force the issue by removing them from one parent and sticking them with another, which is an option some people use, but then that tends to cause quite a lot more trauma for the.
Well, they've tried to suggest that, but at the end of the day, how can they keep him there under his? How can they forcibly keep him there when it's not his wishes? They can't.
There was a case a few years ago that I read about, and this dad had, again, he felt he'd been alienated, so he went to court, and in the end they did remove his kids from the mother and got them to live with him. And he actually, in the end, he relented, because they kept running away. There was 3 of them, I think, and they all kept running away. And he said, I can't put my kids through this. Whatever the rights and wrongs of this, I can't put my kids through that. And I can't, eventually they're going to run away again. And who knows where. So they went back to the mum. And what I also think people lose sight of sometimes is that kid knows the world they're in. So if they've got it, it's harsh, because that some dads and some mums are alienated, without a doubt. But then it's about, well, what are the needs of the child? And if that child has a loving home and family and it's being looked after well, but it doesn't see one of its parents, again, we're back to fine lines. It's a fine line whether you would say, okay, that child needs removing from that house and sticking in this one, or do we let them stay there until they're old enough to make a more informed decision themselves? And having been separated, I know what that would have felt like if I couldn't see my kids. And I was lucky that logistically, for no other reason, logistically, my kids stayed with me.
Yeah.
And then...
But there's coercive control at play.
Yeah.
It don't always work like that, does it?
No, it doesn't. You're quite right. But I've forgotten the point I was going to make. Oh, it was about moving kids around, wasn't it? But it's about remembering. And I've come across a dad who really wanted his child back. But in the end, he came to exactly the same place. He said, I can't keep doing this to him. Look how distressed he's getting. And it wasn't that dad didn't love his son. Mum and dad hadn't got a particularly good relationship, but it wasn't abusive. But again, that dad came to a view where I can't do this to him. I'll need to wait until he's ready to come and see me again. And
as hard as that is, I really respect that as a decision, because that's the right thing to do for that child, in my view. Because, you know, it's right. They will get to an age where they will make their own minds up anyway. And I think if there's that's one of the messages I will always tell parents that we deal with, mums that we deal with, when they're in these scenarios. You know, these children grow up eventually, and they will find out for themselves.
Yep.
I'm a big believer in, you don't have to, you know, call the other parent or sort of inform a child of what's happened in your relationship and things like that to turn the other parent against them, because ultimately that child, you know, will grow up and find that out themselves.
Yeah.
And it is the better way, because what usually happens is it backfires anyway, doesn't it?
Yeah. A lot of the time it does.
But I just think, what do you think would be the best way to reform the family court system? I'm going to put you on spot now. I'm going to put you on spot.
Right. Thank you.
Go on.
My view is that there should be mandatory training on the dynamics and understanding domestic abuse and coercive control and alienation, because too few key people, in my understanding and experience, don't understand it. Like I say, I've been lucky to work with some really positive workers. But the general...
Believe you me, they're not all.
No. But
yeah.
So I think it should be mandatory training. I think the work that Louise Tickle and Hannah Summer are doing in opening up the courts to more scrutiny is a good idea.
Yeah.
I think I'm really impressed with them. I think that the thing about experts is you've only got one expert, and if that expert fastens onto a view that can't be substantiated, it needs an expert on both sides, I think, if you're going to have experts involved. So each family can instruct their own experts through the court, but they actually have that discussion rather than one expert being chosen. And again, you can see certain experts are being chosen and they seem to get involved in a lot of very similar cases. And I've read a couple of reports from a particular expert where it was obviously cut and pasted because they got the gender of the child wrong partway through the report and things like that. There were indicators. So the report wasn't necessarily as objective as it might have been either. So I think more scrutiny and more understanding of regulation and why experts need regulation and how they need to be called to account occasionally.
Do you think that this should be a bit more like a criminal court, but not as, I don't know. I think personally that they need to be opened up. It's as simple as that. I think they need to be opened up to full transparency, because I think we'd start seeing a hell of a lot of difference if that were the case. I think that there needs to be some form of like a small jury or something. You know, instead of it just being one judge making that decision.
Mm-hmm.
I think that because at the moment you can't really, I mean, you can put appeals in and all of that, but it's not really, you can't really you can't complain about a judge. It's virtually impossible.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I think that if they were opened up and they'd got like a small jury, like an advisory board, I suppose, that helped to sort of shape that decision, but then down to 3 professionals, you know, that would make the decision of what they would think is best. Because I think to put it down to one judge that can, and I've heard them say that they've not even had time to read court bundles, and more often than not, it's quite clear that they've not read court bundles, and neither do they care either, to be quite honest.
Right.
So all these reports and hearings, half at time, are just an absolute waste of time and money at the cost of these families' lives, and more often than not, they're very vulnerable families as well.
There do seem to be quite a lot of hearings. The hearings seem to move very slowly forwards.
Years you're looking at, so in some scenarios.
Which then allows.
But
sorry.
Go on, sorry.
Which then allows for entrenched positions as well. Because if you started like 4 or 5 years ago, which, like you said, isn't unusual, then the kids are entrenched where they are. They're entrenched in the system. So shifting the system at that point is getting too late. And the trauma caused by shifting the system at that point could outweigh any possible gain for that child in its future.
Yeah. I think that my take on it is that there's a hell of a lot that could be done before it actually gets to family court. I've said that.
Yeah.
I've been saying that for ages. You know, there's a lot of prevention could be put in place beforehand.
Yeah.
If reports were looked at and that support were put in place a lot at time, I think it would stop it getting to that point.
Yeah.
And usually that does tend to fall with police and social workers. And if they don't get it right, by the time you've got to family court arena, you're screwed, basically. And as a mum, you sat there like in disbelief that this can actually be happening in a court of law where they've used your mental health. And I defy anybody to say that they can get to family court without it having an impact on your mental health. It's impossible.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned. You know, and I think we need to start weighing up, is this system actually doing more damage than good? Because in my opinion, it is. It's doing a hell of a lot more damage than good. And what they've got to consider is the impacts that it's having on these children while they're having these hearings and these reports and these professionals coming in and doing these assessments with children that still aren't being listened to. There's laws that are being just ignored. You know, I think as far as I'm concerned, you know, they're breaching a lot of children's human rights through all of this as well.
All right.
With there's different scenarios where they're splitting kids up.
Yeah.
You know, so and they've got a human right to have a relationship with their siblings, and that's being overlooked. But I think there's so many different case scenarios with it all, and
Yeah.
it's that complex that I don't think they know how to 100% tackle it. Whereas I think that if they were opened up, they had mandatory training, like you say, which for me just seems to be unbelievable. It should be a given as far as I'm concerned. Um, I think that if they'd got more of like a jury type court arena, I think it would be fairer because a lot of time I think that some of these hearings are very unbalanced. I've heard
Yes.
it where they've been one party's been allowed to have witnesses, the other haven't had any witnesses, and things like
Mm.
that.
Yeah.
And that's I think when you get to a point where you've got to have witnesses in play, it's that can't be child focused, can it?
No, I think that's the underlying point of this is about children.
Mm.
And people keep forgetting that there's a kid in the middle of this, or two kids, or three, or whatever. They're in the middle, and they have no control.
Yeah.
They're expected to talk to somebody who just comes in, talks to them, and expects them to spill the beans straight away, tell them how they're feeling,
Mhm.
and be honest about
Mhm.
it. And I don't know about anybody else in my trade, but generally speaking, that it takes me 3 or 4 sessions to get a child's confidence.
Yeah, because you've got to gain that trust with them
Yeah.
for a start, or you're not going to get anywhere, are you?
No. I do like 3 or 4 half-hour sessions. You can see a kid beginning to think, okay, I can trust this person. They're going to do what they say they're going to do, or they're talking to me and they're challenging me gently. And so it's a robust sort of relationship as well as a therapeutic one. But
Yeah. So is it like a family group conference that you do? Is it like that?
I think I've only done one of those in this particular circumstance. I've only done one once.
Mm.
But even with adults, who's going to, after going through half of that process before they see someone like me, who's going to want to be honest and open straight away with me, even though my stuff's
Yeah.
confidential and I can only report generally on what I'm hearing and seeing?
Mm.
And so if adults are like that, what are kids going to be like? And so you're not going to get the full picture, because
No.
kids are very good at defending themselves, or very good at not
Mm.
saying stuff, or
Yeah.
masking.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they are. And particularly if they've been told not to tell what's,
Mm.
you know,
In some
so they're not.
circumstances, yeah.
They will. They're petrified. They're absolutely petrified. And they're not just going to start disclosing because they're petrified that. I mean, my youngest son, um, contact was awarded, and he went for, I think it might have been couple of months, and it's one day he said, "That's it, that's it, that's it." He just point blank demanded, "I am not going anymore. That is it. I can't do it. I can't do it." And the reason later on down the line, I found out that he did agree to have contact was because they thought that I would go to prison
Right.
if he didn't go. Now I don't know where he'd got that from. He were aware of the court situation because, like I've just explained, he'd picked things up,
Mm.
and he thought that by him not going, and he were getting himself in a right state about it.
Yeah.
That's not fair. That's not fair on him at that age.
No.
And going to somewhere where he were being emotionally blackmailed,
Mm.
and he were telling these professionals this eventually, and they still didn't believe him.
Mm.
They still didn't believe him. It was still as though it were my fault. We're all my fault,
Yeah.
and I just don't get it. They need to be able to. I think there has to be quite a significant amount of common sense built into all this as well,
Yeah.
because I think a lot of them lack that, don't they? That's my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, there have certainly been times when I've either been reading reports or or transcripts of hearings or something like that, and you think, what? And how on earth can you come to that conclusion from that intervention? And So it's, and then so in imagining if you're a child on the other end of that, thinking what the hell just happened there, and so you're just going to make them, as you're going to encourage them to mask. You're going to encourage them not to tell everything. If you create the wrong atmosphere, and like I said, there are some really good ones, without a doubt, there are. But there are some that I read where you just think, I just can't believe that that's happening.
No, but the thing is as well, nobody takes any accountability for any of that, do they?
It's rare. I wouldn't say nobody, because again, I've come across people who do say, "Oh, do you know what? I think I got that wrong." And then I guess
I mean to the point where children have actually been murdered because they've they've allowed unsupervised contact.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I interviewed Claire Throssell. I don't know if you saw that one.
I did. I watched about half of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and nobody's actually took any accountability for her two boys being murdered.
No.
And this was a judge that allowed that to happen when there were clear-cut warning signs that, this man was not safe to be around them two children. But it were allowed, and then consequently, she lost her two sons because of that.
Mm.
And as we know, there's been a lot more after that as well.
Yeah.
And I just, it's that. I think that, I don't know. I just think the only way forward with it, this is my opinion, is to open them up so that, and I mean open them up properly, not. And I know that there are journalists going into certain hearings, but are them hearings cherry picked? Do you know what I mean? So that are there certain hearings that they're not allowed to go into because of whatever reason? I don't know if. I just think there's no reason. They've got no valid reason why they shouldn't open them up, in my opinion, because they can still keep the child's identity unknown.
Yeah.
Can't they?
Yeah.
Even though they open them up. So what other valid explanation have they got for not wanting them opening up? That's the question, and that's the question that I think I'd love to be able to ask, and get a clear answer to, because I just think that there's no explanation for it.
No, I think you've got a point that a lot of the time there isn't a valid explanation other than we've always done it this way.
But this way is not working.
No, patent.
Is it?
No.
So I think that unless it goes under scrutiny, because that much is being done in secrecy, then how can it ever be improved?
Yeah.
It can't. Because we don't know about half of it.
Yeah.
I know what I see, you know what you see, which a lot of time it's not very good. But if it was opened up, then it would be under scrutiny, and that's what they're scared of, if you ask me. But I do think that that's the only way that they're going to ever be able to challenge judges, be able to challenge professionals, other than as a mum and a victim going through that. You cannot face going through complaints, procedures, and appeals. It's horrific, and nor should you have to. You shouldn't have to. And I just think that this is my way of being able to expose some of it by doing these podcasts on domestic. So it's domestic abuse and reality exposed on YouTube, Spotify. So if anybody would like to subscribe, would be ecstatic. Where you can watch podcasts like this with me and Mike, who has been a delight, by the way.
Thank you.
So I think this is the only way for me that it can be exposed, because it don't seem to be that journalists don't seem to want to put it on sort of news or documentaries. I know there has been, but are they exposing it enough? Do you know what I mean?
I think I was just thinking then, rather than say exposed, scrutinized might be a better word.
Mm.
I don't know, because exposed might make people feel vulnerable. Scrutinized might make them feel less vulnerable. I know I'm playing a bit semantics there, but it might be worth thinking about going down that route. But it's just, I'm not trying to tell you how to speak, right? But it's just,
No.
it's just worth.
God, you'd have a job on.
Yeah, I thought that as I was saying it, I thought, do I really want to go down this route? So, but it needs scrutinizing, without a doubt. It needs objective scrutiny about, well, how did we come to this decision? Whose best interest was this decision in?
Yeah.
And those questions don't seem to be allowed to be being asked.
I don't understand why they can't. I don't know. Do you think it'd be a possibility where it could be that instead of such an intense time at that point, could they not sort of just say, right, the child isn't wanting contact, can we just leave it be for a bit and then look at it in 6 months' time, perhaps? In a lot of scenarios. I mean, in domestic abuse cases, that would have to be kind of revisited, like, as in terms of it needs specialists to look at it.
Yeah.
And I mean domestic abuse specialists to look at that. Because for me, a lot of social workers, not them all, police officers, not them all, but they're not equipped.
No.
And they're not qualified to be able to spot the signs and to be able to look at it properly. They're just not. And I think that it does need a specialist team to be able to do that. But we've seen specialist DA teams, and they've still failed.
Yeah.
So I just don't know. I don't know. I think that we keep saying we're going to look at this we want it reducing in 10 years and all of that. And I just think, why are they waiting 10 years?
Yeah.
Why?
Yes.
Put consequences in place, clamp down on it, zero tolerance to it, and it's as simple as that. You're always going to have relationships where they'll end up in family courts, but they're not always abusive. It's just parents that can't agree, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's just got into an heated argument. But when it's domestic abuse, that's a totally different ball game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ball game altogether.
Yeah.
So yeah. But I think that's it for today. I've loved talking to you.
Thanks. I enjoyed that.
Keep in touch.
I will. Yeah.
And let's keep chatting.
Yeah.
We might do another one just to catch up and
Okay.
see how we're going in a couple of months, if you're all right with that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, be lovely.
Fab. Thank you, Mike, and I'll speak to you soon.